All right, so let's wrap this up since I was rudely interrupted by a honors student. Let's have a Russian society once again. So for most of Russian history, we have a rigid social hierarchy, meaning that there's very little social mobility. Most of the wealth and land belong to the nobility, the nobles, also known as the boyars. There's a very tiny, small middle class of merchants and artisans and crafts people. But the vast majority of the Russian society were serfs, were peasants. And because of the taxes that were charged, because of all the reforms that we saw under Peter the Great or Catherine the Great, and earlier on under the Mongol occupation, Mongol rule, we see again most people are going to be peasants, and they're going to be pretty much be stuck there forever and ever. The use of serfdom will eventually, lead to increased agricultural production. We're going to see more food surplus, especially when we see the arrival of the new world crops, like especially potatoes, and that's going to kind of like that agricultural basis is going to allow the Russians to expand their economy, expand their trade, and be able to afford and purchase all these new and wonderful things that they're going to get from the West. And serfdom is going to last for a very long time, all the way into 1861. So again, remember, serfdom is a form of slavery, so it's going to more or less last as long as slavery, African slavery, would have in the Americas. Now, because the peasants had very little rights and because there was very little opportunities for them, we're going to see that most of Russian history is going to be riddled with peasant rebellions. And they're going to constantly fight to try to take power away from the Tsar or take power away from the nobles. And even though the Tsar and the nobles, the boyars, were constantly fighting against one another in an attempt to gain power, whenever the peasants rose up against them, the upper class, the nobility, and the monarchs, right, the absolute rulers, the czars, are going to always unite to put down the rebellions. All right, so we see that these peasant rebellions are not going to be very successful, and it's not until the 1800s where peasants serfs are getting more and more rights. So a nice way to wrap this up would be to do a conclusion, a comparison between France and Russia. So there's a few similarities here. Number one, both of these are going to be absolute monarchies, right? France, of course, being led by kings like King Louis XIV, the Sun King. In Russia, we have the Ivans, we have Peter the Great, Catherine the Great. All of them are absolute, or autocratic is another word, autocratic rulers. They have control of everything in the government. There is no constitution like we see in Britain. There is no legislative body like a parliament, that can check and balance the power of the rulers. We see that both of these are going to spend a lot of money on land expansion, right? They're going to expand their territories. France will expand it around the world with its colonies. Russia will expand it across, Asia and Europe. But it's going to cost a lot, and those are going to, raise taxes and spend a lot of money from the treasury. France, however, is going to be one of the centers of the Enlightenment. So a lot of Enlightenment thinkers are going to be from France. People who are going to want, freedom of speech and freedom of religion and freedom of the press and separation of powers and checks and balances, right? All those are Enlightenment ideas. And they're going to be, many of them are going to come from France or from French philosophers. We're not going to see that in Russia, even though, someone like Catherine the Great might have liked those ideas, but we're never going to see any of those in Russia. And we're going to see that they're both of these kind of like autocratic empires, these absolute monarchies. They're both going to come down pretty violently. France is going to have a revolution in the late 1700s. Russia is going to have its revolution in the early 1900s, and it's going to be absolutely bloody and violent. And so we see like the seeds of those revolutions starting now, right? When you take away people's rights and you don't give them any opportunities, and all the power, is accumulated underneath the ruler and the nobility, that's going to set the seeds for people demanding change. So those Russians we talked about earlier, those peasants who rebelled over and over and failed each time, eventually they're going to succeed. And when they do, a whole bunch of people are going to get killed. And the same thing's going to be happening in France. All right, so that's pretty much it for chapter 18. Oh, one last thing, talking about Peter the Great and the process of Westernization. One of the things he wanted to change was Russia's culture. So he wanted the Russian people to dress and appear more like the Western Europeans. So for example, in Russia, it was customary for men to wear robes, right, and have long beards. And because that was like the manly way of appearance. But in Western Europe, it was to wear nice clothing like pants and suits and stuff, and to have a nice, clean shaven or groomed, facial hair. So they passed a law saying that everyone had a beard, had to shave it, or pay a special tax, a beard tax, and then you couldn't wear long clothing anymore, robes. You had to dress, especially this affected the upper class, and it led to a lot of problems because the Russian people didn't want to change their culture. But Peter the Great, he thought this was a process necessary, a Westernization process, because he didn't want the Russian people to dress and think and act like the Easterners, like the Mongols, right? Because wearing long beards and robes, that's kind of like a Mongol thing. And he didn't want to have that. He wanted them to look forward to the West and move forward in the future and progress and not, stay back in the past, stay back with the Mongols. And the same kind of thing is going to happen in China, right? When the Chinese kick out the Mongols, they're going to do everything they can to take away any Mongol cultural influences. So that's another similarity in the effects, the kind of like the long-lasting, lingering effects that the Mongols had on Russia and China. All right, so that's it. Thank you for watching, your patience, and I'll see you next time.